Father in heaven, we want to thank you for a beautiful morning. We want to thank you for this time that we can come together to hear your word. And Lord, I pray a special blessing upon John as he shares with us from the word and from his own experience and just everything that you've done in his life. Thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, thank you, Yoshi, and thank you, everybody, for inviting us here. It's a real pleasure to come. I know that I'm not really going to be telling you anything that you don't already believe, but 2 Peter says it's always good to have a reminder of all of these things, Peter says after his departure. And one of the things that God does too is he was constantly reminding the Israelite people of what he had previously done. So just regard this as being a reminder of all of these things that we all already believe. I'm not trying to tell you anything that you don't already believe. The only tragedy about this really is that I'm inadequate to share the importance of this issue, and I think you'll see from what I've got to say just how important it is. And I trust that the Spirit of God will help me get the message across adequately, because as an ordinary human being, I'm certainly inadequate to share it. But it's great to have the opportunity to come, and thank you again. My wife Heather is down the back. We're going to have to leave shortly after the main service because we've got 2 talks to do at Woolgoolga tomorrow. So we've got a fair bit of travelling to do this afternoon. But I thought I'd start off by saying who we are at Creation Ministries, what we do, why we do it, and why it is so important. And I was at Thornlea Seventh-day Adventist Church last Saturday, and a lady came up to me and she said, what denomination is behind Creation Ministries? Well, of course, there is no denomination behind Creation Ministries. It's a completely non-denominational ministry, and we are simply an affiliated group of Bible-believing Christians, and we operate in several different countries, in Australia, the UK, USA, Singapore, New Zealand and South Africa, and they're all autonomous groupings banded together under that banner of Creation Ministries International. Now, all of them except Singapore have got their own resident speakers, and they're all homegrown ministries, actually, apart from the branch in the US, which was formed by a couple of our Australian people going there and starting that up. But of course, the Americans now have their own setup and their own speakers. And they all have local speakers because that's one of the main things that we do. The Australian head office is in Brisbane. That houses all the Australian staff and 4 full-time scientist speakers. The only other full-time speaker is Mark Harwood, who I believe was here about 4 years ago. Did anybody hear Mark? You would have. Mark's an excellent speaker. He's a very hard act for me to follow, but we'll do our best. But if you want to hear Mark again, on the 23rd of June, he is speaking at the Impact Centre here in Erina. So that would be a great thing to go and attend as well. Mark's going to give 2 talks that night. But all the other states, including New South Wales, have got part-time speakers, and I happen to be one of those. What else do? We produce Creation Magazine, that's produced in Brisbane. For the more technically minded, we produce an in-depth technical journal. As you probably realise, if you are a Christian and a creationist, and you are a scientist and you do some research, it's impossible to get that research published in any secular magazine. They don't want to know anything about creation. So we have this journal of creation so that people who do the research have got somewhere to publish that research, and it's a peer-reviewed journal. We offer a free email service, and we encourage everybody to subscribe to that. These emails, as well as being interesting and informative, they do remind people of the importance of the issue. and especially when there's something topical. You might remember a few weeks ago there was a great announcement that the scientists had discovered the Big Bang. They had finally got what they said was proof. Well, Creation Ministries tries to give a biblically based response within a few days, and we did that. But of course, it only took 3 days for the secular world to come out and give a biblically based, not a biblically based response, but a secular response. And they suggested that the people put the champagne back in the fridge for the moment because they didn't really agree with what they were saying. But this is a good time to introduce my helpers, and I'd like them to come forward now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what these people do. We've got Barry and Rosemary, Kath and Ian, who are going to come forward. They've got some clipboards, and they belong to groups that we call the Friends of Creation Ministries groups. And in every capital city and in a number of regional centres, we have groups of people who support the ministry. Hang on a sec, Barry. Before you do, I'll just talk a little bit about it. It would be impossible for Creation Ministries to operate with speakers if we didn't have support groups of people all over the place. And we've got them in all capital cities. We have a group in Newcastle. We have a new fledgling group here on the Central Coast, and they're always looking for volunteers and members. So what they do is they hand out what we call the sign-up forms. If you would like to sign up for the free email service, there's no obligation, but it really is very, very useful. They're going to pass around some yellow forms now. Just put in your email address and particularly as well your postcode, because postcodes help us to target information to people. There's not much point in telling people in Perth that there's going to be a meeting in Erina because they're not likely to be able to attend. So they're going to pass these clipboards around. Feel free to fill in, Barry and Rosemary, just hand them around. Sorry? Mm. Right, thanks Barry. So email addresses and postcodes if you want to receive the free emails that we offer. And it really is a great help. It's a constant reminder of the importance of the issue, and when topical things come up, it's very useful to have the biblically based response. We've also got an amazing website. The website is managed from Australia. Pretty easy web address to remember, creation.com. I'm sure you probably don't even have to write that down. But all the countries contribute to this website. There's about 8,500 articles on the website, mostly written by specialist scientists or theologians, but at understandable level. And it covers everything. It covers, there are articles in foreign languages. It's a fantastic resource, particularly for students. You can search by either the search window up there or by topics, or any question that you've got, you can put into that search window and it will bring up a whole list of articles on that particular topic. And you can read them online or you can print them out. You can do whatever you like. It's completely free. Even there's advice for Christian school children who are in the public education system, even advice to them as to how to answer an exam question on evolution and still remain true to your Christian beliefs. Taz Walker, who's one of our speakers, he did his PhD in geology after he became a Christian, and he had to face that, and he's written a few articles giving advice to students on that. Completely free, no registration, no new passwords to remember. You just open up creation.com and you're ready to go. Downstairs we've got a book and DVD stall. As Pastor Yoshi said, If there's anything that you would like down there, fill in the order book and the ministry will be in touch with you during the week. But as he said as well, we trust you. They would like you to take whatever you want with you today, and they will bill you later on during the week. We've also got an app for smartphones, and we're on Facebook and Twitter. It doesn't really apply to me, but a lot of people do. So that's who we are, and that's what we do. Why do we do it, and why is the creation message so urgent? Well, it's urgent because this is the information age, and we really do have to have answers, and we have a serious responsibility towards the people who are unsaved. And the good news is that there are answers to the questions that people have, and we need to avail ourselves of them. We've also got an even more serious responsibility in our own families. Lots of young people operate on their parents' faith, and they need to come to a personal faith of their own. Because there is a war on. The Bible is what's under the direct attack from the world, but there's a lot of collateral damage, and the collateral damage is people. The long ages and the evolutionary scenario, they stop unbelievers coming to Christ, and they rock the faith of many Christians. And even worse than that, there is a large attrition rate of young people who are brought up in church, but when they get out in the world, they fall away from the faith because they haven't had the sort of grounding that we offer here at Creation Ministries. And I'm sure many of you will have seen that sort of thing happen, maybe in your own families, but to the children and grandchildren of friends that you have. When they get challenged in the workplace or at university and they don't have the answers, they can easily fall away. There's going to be a couple of medical analogies here. If you're a traveller and if you're going into a hostile environment, you want to protect yourself, don't you? So you take mosquito nets and repellent and protective clothing, maybe even a mask, because the consequences of an unseen attack can be fatal. And one of our aims at Creation Ministries is to convince parents of the special need to protect their children, themselves too, of course, because the virus of long age evolution is everywhere. But by the grace of God, there is now a very effective vaccine against this virus, and that vaccine is familiarity with Creation Ministries materials. The value of our materials is that they're not just information, they teach principles of understanding, and that's very important for young people in particular. And the first thing that they really need to know, and I know that I'm not telling you people here anything, is that the biblical position is crystal clear and it is uncompromising. This is what we read in Genesis 5. It says, Adam lived 130 years and he begot Seth, and then he lived 800 years after that, and Seth lived 105 years and begot Enosh, and Enosh 90 years and begot Canaan, and so on. And you'll see there's this sequence of patriarchs: Adam, Seth, Enosh, Canaan, Mahalalel, and Jared. And you can add up the years and you get 1,656 years to Noah. There's about another 350 to Abraham. There's about 2,000 from Abraham to Jesus, and about 2,000 from Jesus to now. So that makes about 6,000 years. Now, lest anybody say, well, that's Old Testament, can we really rely on it? Yes, we can, because if we turn to the New Testament, in Luke chapter 3, we get Jesus' genealogy. First, Luke takes him back to David, and then to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he goes on to say, the son of Jared, Mahalalel, Canaan, Enosh, Seth, the son of Adam, who was the son of God. And it is exactly the same sequence in the 3rd chapter of Luke, going backwards this time. So nobody can say it's just an Old Testament patriarchal line. It's there in the New Testament as well. So if the Bible is true, and if the age of the earth is about 6,000 years, That means that the millions and billions of years that you constantly hear about are totally incompatible with that biblical account. If the Bible is true, they must be fantasy, they must be non-existent, and in truth, that is what they are. They are non-existent. And people will sometimes say, how can modern science be so wrong? Don't the scientists have ways of proving that the Earth is millions of years old? Well, the answer, of course, is no, they don't. And to show how they can be so wrong, we have to have a look at how science actually works. If we think first of all of operational science, what springs to mind when we think of science? The sort of science that put men on the moon, gives us our everyday transport and communications, the sort of science that we entrust our lives to every single day. You could call it descriptive. It's observable, measurable, repeatable, falsifiable, and predictable. And nobody has any argument with that type of science. Nothing in the Bible conflicts with it. In fact, the founders of modern science, like Newton and Faraday, they were Bible-believing Christians, and they realized that the universe operated on orderly, God-given principles. And modern science actually grew out of Christianity. But there's a second type of science that we might call historical science, and that attempts to explain how things got to be the way they are. Now, that's a very different type of science. It's speculative, the events happened once only, they weren't observed, and they're unrepeatable. Historical science is simply a matter of opinion, and your opinion is often shaped by what you already believe. The observed facts don't speak for themselves. An expertise in one area does not guarantee your credibility in the second area. It is still a matter of opinion. And with historical science, you can't prove either view. You can only say one view is consistent or inconsistent with the evidence. And if we were to ask who's got the best scientific evidence, the evolutionist or the creationist, well, the answer, of course, is that neither has the best scientific evidence. They all have exactly the same evidence. Nobody has got a monopoly on scientific facts. They're available to everybody. That's why we say everyone's got exactly the same evidence, including the Bible. The unbelievers have got access to the Bible. They may not want to believe it, but they still have access to it, and it is historical evidence. So exactly the same evidence, like the fossil that you see here, they can be interpreted in different ways. The biblical creationist believes that it was buried in Noah's worldwide flood. The evolutionist believes that it shows the order of evolution. Same evidence, but completely different interpretation. Evolution is a historical science. It's not based on observation or measurement. It's a matter of opinion. And I have a quote here from an evolutionist. He said, "Evolutionary biology, by contrast with physics and chemistry, is a historical science. The evolutionist attempts to explain events and processes that have already taken place. And laws and experiments are inappropriate techniques for explaining such events. Instead, one constructs a historical narrative consisting of a tentative reconstruction of the particular scenario that led to the events one is trying to explain." A regular diet of our material gives great protection against the constant onslaught of this evolutionary propaganda. And we know from the testimonies we get that Christians exposed to regularly exposed to our products are vastly better informed about these issues than those who are not. And we also know that the magazine is foremost amongst those materials. Anybody here already get the magazine? I'm sure there'll be quite a few hands. There are quite a few hands that didn't go up. So what we would like to do is give you an opportunity to subscribe to the magazine. As well as the hard copy, it now comes in a digital version, and it's downloadable on up to 5 devices, iPhones, iPads, laptops, and so on. And if you're a parent or a grandparent, you can't afford for your children not to have access to this material. and there's not a week goes by without the office getting a glowing testimony as to its value. The helpers will hand around some more forms now. They look like that. Just decide whether you want to be a 1-year subscriber or a 3-year subscriber. Fill it in with your name and address, and once again, the office will contact you during the week. So that's who we are, what we do, and why we do it. Why do we say it is so vitally important? Well, the main reason is because evolution actually destroys the gospel. And this is a well-known atheist called Frank Zindler, and he said this in a debate. He said the most devastating thing that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Now that we know that Adam and Eve never were real people, so he says, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. He said, if there never was an Adam and an Eve, there never was an original sin. If there never was an original sin, there's no need of salvation. If there's no need of salvation, there's no need of a saviour. And I submit, he says, that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. I think that evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. And whatever you want to disagree with Frank Zindler, you can't fault his logic. What he follows, what he says, naturally follows if the Genesis account of Adam and Eve, creation and the fall, is not true history. If it's not, then the gospel has completely lost its foundation of Jesus' death being the penalty for sin. The gospel doesn't have a foundation without the Genesis account of beginnings. Because the Bible clearly tells us that God started with an original first man and woman, Adam and Eve, and in the next talk I'm going to talk about some of the confirmatory evidence from science for their existence, contrary to what Frank Zindler claimed in his quote there. The same book tells us about the fall into sin, the entry of death, disease and suffering into the world. The world observes all these things, but it assumes that they're just a natural part of life. The Bible says that death, disease and suffering are intruders, that the original creation was not subject to death and decay. It also explains how our relationship with God was lost. And unless we have an understanding of that foundation, we can't explain Jesus to anybody. Why did he have to live the perfect life as representative man? Why did he have to be sinless perfection to die on the cross for our sin? He had to be human. He had to be the Son of Man so that he could be our kinsman redeemer. Now, none of this makes any sense unless Genesis is true history. There's also no other way that we can explain the final restoration. What does restoration mean if it wasn't the original state of man and beast? Logically, if we're going to have a restoration, it must be a restoration to what was once there. So many of you are going to have seen that your own children or grandchildren or your friends' children walk away from their faith, often because of evolutionary teaching, and they need to know from an early age that the biblical position is defensible. That's why we say at Creation Ministries, be wise, immunise your children by means of our magazine, our emails, our materials, and of course our website. And don't ever forget that this is a spiritual battle that we're in. 2 Corinthians says, our battle is to break down every deceptive argument and every imposing defence that men erect against the true knowledge of God. We fight to capture every thought until it acknowledges the authority of Christ. And long ages and evolution are probably the most deceitful of the modern arguments that stop people coming to the Lord. And our job at Creation Ministries is to expose the deceit that's there, and I'm going to be expanding on some of that deceit in my main talk. But what I was going to do was to start or give an opportunity for you to ask questions. And Pastor Yoshi actually emailed me a few. And if you like, Pastor, I'll go on with a couple of the ones that you asked me about.
Yep, just before we do that, I did mention earlier that initially when we talked about having this discussion group, we're going to have it in a small group setting to be more, personal and face-to-face up in that room over there. But most that have come this morning have told me that they want to do it in this setting. So we're all not going to fit in that group over there. We do normally have our normal Sabbath school classes that run. There's a couple of teachers who have prepared, so I don't want to take that away from them. Now, maybe we'll just take a minute or so. If you want to have a Sabbath school class in that room over there, Cheryl's one of our teachers, and one on the outside. Maybe I should just ask for a show of hands, or would you prefer to just stay here? If you want to... yeah.
Nobody seems to be moving.
My apologies for that, because I was under the impression that we wanted to continue to have small group discussions, which we all love, because we have a really good small group thing going here. But I think they really want to know about what's going on here and the opportunity to ask questions. So I'm wondering if anybody would actually like to have our small groups on the outside, and nobody's getting too excited and standing up and moving out. We can discreetly move if we all close our eyes right now. Well, there we go. I guess my apologies to the teachers who have spent their time preparing, so my apologies for that. But I guess we'll have some question time. We'll have some roving mics in just a moment. So, John, maybe I'll get you to answer a couple of these questions that I personally have.
Yeah.
As the pastor, I get to ask the questions first. But I think one of them specifically relates to carbon dating.
I'm going to do that second. I'm going to do one bit just before that.
Yep.
But you also said, you mentioned the words micro and macro evolution. Yep. So I was going to touch on that first, and then I'll get on to carbon dating. I suppose we really ought to look at what really is evolution, and what are these terms that people use, micro and macro evolution. We actually suggest that Christians don't use those terms because evolutionists do, and it becomes confusing. What they're really talking about is that if we might call it macro evolution, or the general theory of evolution, is that lifeless chemicals actually became the first life. Now, that is an impossible first step that is studiously avoided. It's a hurdle no evolutionist has ever been able to jump. They cannot get to first base getting lifeless chemicals into the first cell. But if we then assume that they did actually get started, it has to be a process of increasing complexity over time, as we see here on the chart, with the most primitive life ultimately becoming man at the top of the tree. Now, this is what Darwin proposed. He didn't know anything about mutations or genetic changes because genetics hadn't been described in his day, but he only proposed a type of natural selection or survival of the fittest, as they called it. The modern theory of evolution includes mutations. But mutations and so-called natural selection or survival of the fittest, they are still the only two mechanisms that are proposed to this day. Mutations are actually changes in the genetic program, and they're almost universally harmful, just as you might expect. Random changes to any well-functioning program normally damage it. Just like any computer program gets corrupted over time, so our very, very well-functioning genetic program gets corrupted over time by the mutations that occur in it. Now, theoretically, natural selection selects for helpful mutations to give better survival capabilities, but it can only select for genetic information which is already there. It can't create any new information, and it's never been observed to create any new information. It actually reduces the genetic information, and I'm going to give you a little example to show you that. If we have a look at dogs, now we can see outward changes as we do with all the various dog breeds, but selection for the various characteristics in the dog breeds invariably involves loss of genetic information and not gain. Yes, there is change, the sort of thing that sometimes they call microevolution or change or adaptation, but that change is always in a downhill direction, not in an uphill direction, not increasing information. And just to show you this, we're going to imagine two dogs. Now, here we have a couple of little doggies, one male and one female, and we're going to imagine that they have two genes for length of fur. One for short fur and one for long fur. Now, this is very diagrammatic, but it's going to put across a particular point that we want to make. Now, if those two dogs get together, then what they can produce is a mixture of puppies. They can get one who's got the gene for very short fur. They can get a couple that look a bit like mum and dad with one of each. But they can get another one, a little fellow who's got the two genes for long fur, and he is a very, very shaggy dog indeed. Now, supposing we go through a period of climate change and we enter an ice age. Now, which of the dogs is the more likely to survive? Well, most people would say the shaggy dog over here, because he's much better insulated against the cold. Now, that's going to put a lot of pressure on the ones that don't have quite as long fur as he does. So we then may, if the climate change is really severe, we might actually lose the dogs that have got either very, very short fur or the two genes that will give them medium fur, and the only survivors are going to be the dogs with the very long fur. And they can only reproduce exactly what they have. The gene for short fur has disappeared from the doggy population. Now, if the climate then changes again to become hot, the dogs no longer have the capability to produce short fur. They may actually become extinct in a very hot climate because they are too heavily insulated against cold and can't tolerate heat. And you can see from that natural selection is always in this downhill direction. It can't produce evolution. Not only that, the dogs can't change into non-dogs. Even though they might sometimes look very similar, dogs do not change into cats. There's never been any observation of one kind changing into another. Now, we know that the Bible talks about kinds, things reproducing after their kind. The word species is a man-made term. That's not the same as the biblical kind. We might talk about various species of horses or zebra, but they're all within the one horse-type kind. And all dogs, like wolves and coyotes and the like, are all within the dog kind. Lions and tigers and panthers and leopards and pussycats, all within the cat kind, and they never change from one kind into another. That has never been seen to occur. Okay, what about carbon dating? Everybody's heard of it. What I'd like to describe first of all is what we mean by radioactive decay. Radioactive elements lose either electrons or they lose helium nuclei, alpha particles, and they degrade from one level to another. That's what radioactivity is all about. They're unstable atoms. And the rate at which they decay is usually expressed in terms of half-life, so that the original quantity after a particular period of time becomes half, and then after the same period of time a quarter, then an eighth and a 16th, and so on down the scale. And it doesn't take too many half-lives before you get a very, very tiny quantity because it's an exponential type curve that goes downwards. Now, I lost my train of thought there. Now, the half-life of radioactive carbon is about 5,700 years, so that after that period of time, the original quantity would become half, and then a quarter, then an eighth, and so on. There's not very much to start with. And as it turns out, our technology is only able to measure the amount that would be produced after about 15 half-lives. And that's only about 80 or 90,000 years, even if those years existed. So radioactive carbon cannot give millions of years. It can only give thousands of years. It's the rocks from which they get the millions of years, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But carbon dating, of course, only applies to organic things, things that once contained carbon, like bones and our bodies, trees and vegetative matter, and so on. But the way it works is that nitrogen atoms are converted in the upper atmosphere into radioactive carbon atoms by collision with, well, usually it's cosmic rays that do it. And that radioactive carbon then forms carbon dioxide, gets taken up by the plants, the animals consume the plants, and they take in radioactive carbon, and while it decays, they give out some. But when the animal dies, they're not taking in any more, and all the radioactive carbon that's in them starts to decay. So, in theory, that can function as a type of clock. And the concept was absolutely brilliant. It got the discoverer, Willard Libby, a Nobel Prize. But the problem is it relies on lots of assumptions, and if the assumptions are wrong, the answer is always going to be wrong. It assumes, for example, that we know what the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere was back whenever. Well, do we? When I went to school, I was told that the carbon dioxide content of the air was 0.04%. That's the percentage I've read about recently. But according to the climate scientists, if it doesn't stop rising, we're all going to be wiped out because all the ice caps are going to melt. So do we know, if we don't know what it is now, what it's going to be in the future, what it was 200 years ago, how do we know what it was thousands of years ago? We simply don't. Do we know what the carbon-12, carbon-14 or radioactive carbon ratio was years ago? No, we don't. Libby assumed that it was the same that it is now. But he knew that it wasn't actually. He knew that carbon-14 was actually building up in the atmosphere, but he had to assume for the purposes of his clock that it was the same as now. We just don't know the ratio thousands of years ago. What we do know is the Earth's magnetic field is declining, so there are more cosmic rays coming in now. We just don't know what was happening thousands of years ago. So the assumptions that are made are all unprovable, and many of them are obviously untrue. It also assumes that plants will take up radioactive carbon dioxide in the same way that they take up normal carbon dioxide. We don't know that, and it would seem that they probably don't. It assumes that there was no global flood. In Noah's flood, the earth was completely denuded of plants and there weren't very many animals left. Now, the animals are supposed to be producing the carbon dioxide and the methane. The plants are supposed to be taking up the carbon dioxide. If there weren't any of either at the end, or very few animals and no vegetation at the end of Noah's flood, then we simply don't know what the carbon dioxide levels were then. Now, the world assumes that there never was a global flood, but our Bible tells us that there was. So the answers that you get from carbon dating must be inaccurate if the global flood was true. And the further back in time we go, the less likely it is to be accurate. I was just going to show you too that there are many anomalous results. Coal is supposedly hundreds of millions of years old, and yet it has radioactive carbon in it. Now, if the maximum possible, even if those years were true, was about 90,000, then how come coal is said to be hundreds of millions of years old? It is a scientific impossibility. Diamond is the same. Diamonds are supposedly 1 billion years old. They're pure carbon. They have radioactive carbon in them. So their age must also be only thousands of years. So I'm going to hand it over to you now and to Yoshi for any questions. And
Thank you, John. The reason I posted those questions is because as a pastor, those were the two probably some of the most common questions that I've received. So I thought I'd give John a bit of time to prepare for some of those and give you more compelling evidence. A lot of the materials, I've looked at the website extensively. A lot of these answers can't be found there. But we've got 2 microphones going around, one on each side. So if you have any questions, make sure you speak into the microphone because we would like to have this on record. If there's any questions, just put your hand up. We've got Creation Ministries here. Any? Yep. Teresa, maybe we'll start off on this end. Great. By the way, thank you once again for the last-minute change, especially for the Sabbath School teachers for facilitating this.
Dr. Anderson, is it true that the trees that exist today are dated to, some of them are dated to 4,000 years?
Okay. There are no known trees on Earth older than about 3,500 or 4,000 years. There are some that are claimed to be, but they're sort of cloned from others, but there is no tree on Earth known to be older than that. Now, if we go back in time, Noah's flood occurred about 4,350 years ago. So that is absolutely consistent with the time of Noah's flood.
Any other questions? By the way, it seems like, if I may just make a comment here, Dr. Anderson, it seems like a lot of what we seem to hear as science is based on a lot of assumptions. And they just skip all of that and assume that what they believe is true because they just assume that all of that is done away with.
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely true. And one of the things that the Creation Ministries material helps you to do is to see in a scientific report the facts and the assumptions, because they're all intermingled. A classic example is the existence of comets. Now, comets are known to be only about 10,000 years old maximum, but it's assumed that the universe is umpteen billion years old. So how come, if comets can only last 10,000 years before they disintegrate, how come we still see them? So it's been proposed that there is some source out there called an Oort cloud that is generating new comets and firing them into our solar system. Never been observed. But when you read a report, and there was one that I read a few months ago about a new comet that the Russians had found called the comet Ison, interspersed with this report was the statement that comets generate from the Oort cloud out there. Now, there's no such thing as a known Oort cloud, but interspersed with the facts are all these hypotheses, and it helps you with the creation material to be able to read that and sort one from the other.
A question from Bill over there.
Would you like to comment on theistic evolution?
Yeah, okay. Well, the theistic evolutionists are people who claim to be Bible believers, but they accept that evolution has occurred, or that God in some way used it. The problem with any form of evolution is that it has to put death before Adam's sin. And that's what we emphatically deny as Bible believers. The Bible is quite clear that there was no death before Adam's sin, and that includes animal death. We know that Genesis 1:30 says that God provided all the vegetation as food for man and the animals. He did not provide animals, or animals were not designed to be preying upon another. So that's really the clincher. Theistic evolution cannot be true because it puts death before sin. That's really the answer to the question.
Any other questions? Just hang on a second.
Hi. I've read quite a bit about Noah's flood and the evidence for it all around the world in the layers. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah. This is another problem that the theistic evolutionists often claim. They claim that Noah's flood was only a local flood. Now, apart from the very, very clear terminology in the Bible that it was all those encompassing terms, Noah was also required to take on board all the birds. Now, why would he have to take on board all the birds for a local flood? It doesn't make any sense. Some of them can circumnavigate the globe, so the birds could just have flown off somewhere else if it was a local flood. Even Christians who believe in the local flood, they look at areas like Mesopotamia to find evidence of a flood. What they don't realise is we're standing on it, right? The world that was originally created is not the world that we are standing on today. The world we're standing on today, with all the sedimentary rock layers that are all over the place, and they're in every country, all very, very similar, they have obviously been caused by, well, everybody agrees that they've been caused by water, but Noah's flood is the most logical explanation for all of those sedimentary rock layers. I'm going to mention a little bit about them in the next talk as well, but not only are they all layered like that, they're also full of dead things, fossils, right? Which clearly the Bible says everything that wasn't in the ark with Noah, or every land animal that breathed there that wasn't in the ark with Noah, everything died. So they're full of dead things. So that's really the reason why we believe that those sedimentary layers obviously are left over from Noah's flood. All over the world. 75% of the Earth's surface is covered by this sedimentary rock, and it's the same everywhere. And I've made a point over the years, wherever I've been, of looking to see it, and I can tell you, it's the same everywhere. Now, Heather and I went down to the Antarctic last year. There it is in the Antarctic. Same sort of sedimentary layers everywhere.
Question in the back.
My son likes dinosaurs, and I often think how I'm going to explain what happened to the dinosaurs. Can you? I've heard that when flood happened, the atmosphere wasn't okay for dinosaurs to live anymore. Can you?
How old is he?
4.
Is he coming to the next session?
He is.
Because the talk to the children is on dinosaurs and where they fit.
Thank you.
That was actually one of my questions. I'm a little bit older than 4, but, as a kid in all of us, Harold.
John, it seems that the greatest evidence in recent times is the Big Bang. Would you like to talk about that, how they get it and why it isn't?
Look, it's not the area that I'm, really very au fait with. One of our speakers is Professor John Hartnett, who's an astrophysicist at Adelaide University. And if you're really interested in the Big Bang type stuff, there's plenty on the website that has been written by experts for it. But what we say is, and there's a book on the table actually called Dismantling the Big Bang, which John Hartnett has co-authored. It doesn't add up. It can only make sense with postulating physical concepts that we don't know exist, like dark matter and dark energy. Now, we don't know that they exist. John Hartnett has also written a book called Starlight, Time and the New Physics, so explaining cosmology with new physical concepts. Now, I haven't really heard anybody try and denounce or correct his book in any way. Nobody's come out and said that his book is incorrect. If you think of a parallel, in the beginning of the 20th century, scientists had noticed a slight perturbation in the Earth's orbit, I think, and they just wobble, a slight wobble, and they knew that there had to be, or they thought there had to be some other mass in our solar system that they couldn't see that was responsible for it. And so it was postulated that there was a planet on the other side of the sun that we couldn't see. And that planet was called Vulcan. And of course, Spock was a Vulcan with big ears. But then along came Einstein, and he slightly corrected Newtonian physics. And that explained the wobble. So the planet Vulcan disappeared. It didn't exist because it didn't need to exist. Now they're postulating stuff that is not known, dark matter, dark energy. Now, if the physics are not fully known and they are corrected, dark matter and dark energy and the Big Bang will disappear.
Any questions?
I just like to know what's wrong with their instruments as far as the carbon dating is concerned. So these people that are testing age of fossils, they use what is called carbon dating machines. And what's wrong with it?
There's nothing wrong with the measurements. Scientists have got great technology and they can measure quantities very accurately, but you have to then interpret the quantities. And if you make assumptions that are false at the beginning, then the answer that you get at the end is going to be completely wrong. Now, we've seen sort of parallel examples with some of the climate change scientists. They come out with computer models of what's going to happen in years down the track. Now, if what you feed in one end of the computer is incorrect, then the answer that you get at the other end is going to be incorrect. And if the assumptions on which your carbon dating is made are false, then the answer is also going to be incorrect. Now, it's probably reasonably accurate going back 1,000 years or so, but beyond that, and even archaeologists will correct it by what they call the field evidence. If the carbon dating is not the primary way they test the date of something, it will be a confirmation of the date that they already believe. So it's not really the primary way of estimating the age of things.
Just we got Dennis on that side, and Pamela will come back to you in just a moment.
Thank you for your insights. I just want to reflect for a few moments, just very briefly, on an experience I had when I was a very small child visiting a museum in Auckland. There was a little diorama, and I couldn't quite get my head around the whole thing, but it had at the top of it a little quote saying, "Is this an example of circular reasoning?" And on one side of the diorama they showed a whole lot of layers with the fossils in it, and it says we actually date the fossils by which layer they find in. And then over here we date the layers by what fossils are in the layers. And I just wondered if you've come across anything like that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct. It is an example of circular reasoning. The layers are dated by the fossils in them, and the fossils are dated by the layers that they're found in. It is circular reasoning, and there is no absolute measurement to date the fossils. I'm going to put up in the next talk the chart that you often see, the chart of all the layers and the millions of years, and tell you how that came about. But it didn't come about by any evidence whatsoever. It was just people's imagination.
Yeah, again, on those lines, the Mount St. Helens volcano really shows that up, because I believe the creation scientists carbon dated it within a very short time after the volcano, and it said it happened millions of years ago. Yeah. Maybe people would be interested in that.
Not carbon dated it, rock dated it.
Oh, okay.
The lava dome of the volcano, which of course is only 30 or 40 years old, and it dates in the millions.
So that may be something you could expand on.
I'm going to expand on that in the next talk.
We have 5 more minutes, so any more? Yep, done.
My question is about Darwin's theory. They teach that as the truth in schools still today. I've heard that before Darwin died, he said that he didn't even believe his own theory. Is this true?
As far as we know, Darwin got further and further into his own ideas. He did say that if they couldn't find a lot of transitional fossils, that is one thing changing into another, then that would make his theory very suspect. But as far as we know, he never changed, he never recanted, and the story that's often bandied about how he came back to the Lord at the end of his days, there is no evidence for that.
That was also one of the questions that I had, because most of it is received through the email. But somebody once said that you can't believe everything you hear on the internet, and it was Abraham Lincoln who said this. So I got one of those too. So that was actually one of the questions. Any other questions? Maybe we have 1 or 2 more before we...
Yeah.
I just wondered if you could say more about the creation scientists, what degrees they have, how many of them are, because I heard that there are more scientists who believe in creation and God than those who don't. And it just seems to be strange that we have all this evolution constantly.
Yeah. Look, you're absolutely correct that there are thousands of Bible-believing scientists who are creationists. Unfortunately, they never get a hearing, because the moment that you even mention God or creation or any suggestion against evolution in a paper, that paper will never get published in a secular journal, because it will simply end up in the bin, because they have to be peer-reviewed. The peers who are doing the reviews are, generally speaking, evolutionists, and they simply don't tolerate any rocking of the evolutionary boat. It's often said, you creation scientists don't do any research. Well, They do, but they can't get it published in secular journals because they make reference to either a creator or to the Bible or something like that. But I suppose it's fair to say that the people who are occupying the positions of power and authority in the world, in the positions of influence, they are very, very hardened atheistic evolutionists, and they do not allow any rocking of the evolutionary boat. The same thing happens really in Christian circles, in theological colleges. You know, most of the theological colleges throughout the world have now got the people in the higher positions who are theistic evolutionists. You know, and unfortunately, this is the devil's trick, isn't it? You know, if you were a wolf and you wanted to prey on the sheep, you'd get yourself in a position where you made it easier for yourself to do that. It's a bit like putting the fox in charge of the chicken house, but that's really what's happened in the theological colleges throughout the world, including major ones in this country.
One last question in the back.
You might like to mention Walter Veith. People may be interested to...
I don't know whether you people are familiar with Professor Walter Veith, but he's a Seventh-day Adventist, and he's a very, very competent creationist speaker, and he speaks on a lot of other topics as well, particularly end-time stuff. I've got a lot of Walter's DVDs and find them very, very informative. Are you all familiar with him? Yeah. That's right. He was a zoology professor, and his testimony is amazing. That how he came to see all the subtle changes that were coming through in the textbooks as they were reproduced, and he realised that the truth was just not there.
Okay, time is running away from us. We're going to have one last question, one really last question, because that was more of a comment than a question.
Well, look, Creation Ministries doesn't have a formal position on climate change, but the reason why I would personally be a skeptic, it's a bit like what I just talked about creation scientists not getting papers published. Because it's so politicised, anybody with a differing view is never going to get funding for research and is never going to get papers published, because the peers who are reviewing the papers have made their fame and fortune out of supporting climate change. So I don't believe that you can believe everything that you read, and there's no doubt that there has been, for political reasons, some contrary views have been suppressed. Now, that's not science. Science is supposedly the searcher after truth, but clearly it's not happening in the area of climate change.
Thank you, John. We're going to take a break for about 20 minutes. We have drinks and reception, drinks on the reception area outside. If I can just make this comment before we go, I think we wanted to have Creation Ministries here today to answer some of these assumptions, because a lot of it people deal with facts, but facts are based by assumptions. I mean, from what you've said, historical science, so to speak, that's quite different from the science that we know, and everyone seems to lump it all together. So anytime anybody shows you an evidence, as a pastor of the church, I challenge you to do the same in terms of your biblical understanding as well. Just because somebody shows you an article saying something doesn't make it necessarily true. You almost have to take a step back and find out for yourselves and challenge your assumptions. And that's one of the things we wanted to do today.